Hello and welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical trivia and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson, hoping his laryngitis makes him sound like the Batman. Because my voice is going this week, I'm cheating. I'm going to use some material I recorded for LibriVox a very long time ago, which includes one of the oldest known ghost stories in the Western canon. It's written by Pliny the Younger. After the recording of my younger, slightly less vigilante voice, I'll come back in with some explanation of how the material can be used in role-playing settings. So now to my co-host, me from 2011.
Letter to Sura by Pliny the Younger. Our leisure furnishes me with the opportunity of learning from you, and you with that of instructing me. Accordingly, I particularly wish to know whether you think there exist such things as phantoms, possessing an appearance peculiar to themselves and a certain supernatural power, or that mere empty delusions receive a shape from our fears. For my part, I am led to believe in their existence, especially by what I hear happened to Curtius Rufus. While still in humble circumstances and obscure, he was a hanger-on in the suite of the governor of Africa. While pacing the colonnade one afternoon, there appeared to him a female form of superhuman size and beauty. She informed the terrified man that she was Africa, and had come to foretell future events, for that he would go to Rome, would fill offices of state there, and would even return to that same province with the highest powers, and die in it. All of which things were fulfilled. Moreover, as he touched at Carthage, and was disembarking from his ship, the same form is said to have presented itself to him on the shore. It is certain that, being seized with illness, and auguring the future from the past, and misfortune from his previous prosperity, he himself abandoned all hope of life, though none of those about him despaired. Is not the following story again still more appalling, and not less marvellous? I will relate it as it was received by me. There was at Athens a mansion, spacious and commodious, but of evil repute and dangerous to health. In the dead of night there was a noise as of iron, and, if you listened more closely, a clanking of chains was heard, first of all from a distance, and afterwards hard by. Presently a spectre used to appear, an ancient man, sinking with emaciation and squalor, with a long beard and bristly hair, wearing shackles on his legs and fetters on his hands, and shaking them. Hence the inmates, by reason of their fears, passed miserable and horrible nights in sleeplessness. This want of sleep was followed by disease, and their terrors increasing, by death. For in the daytime as well, though the apparition had departed, yet a reminiscence of it flitted before their eyes, and their dread outlived its cause. The mansion was accordingly deserted, and, condemned to solitude, was entirely abandoned to the dreadful ghost. However, it was advertised on the chance of someone, ignorant of the fearful curse attached to it, being willing to buy or rent it. Athenodorus the philosopher came to Athens and read the advertisement. When he had been informed of the terms, which were so low as to appear suspicious, he made inquiries, and learned the whole of the particulars. Yet none the less on that account, nay, all the more readily, did he rent the house. As evening began to draw on, he ordered a sofa to be set for himself in the front part of the house, and called for his notebooks, writing implements, and a light. The whole of his servants he dismissed to the interior apartments, and for himself applied his soul, eyes, and hand to composition, that his mind might not, for want of an occupation, picture to itself the phantoms of which he had heard, or any empty terrors. At the commencement there was the universal silence of the night. Soon the shaking of the irons and the clanking of chains was heard. Yet he never raised his eyes, nor slackened his pen, but hardened his soul and deadened his ears by its help. The noise grew and approached. Now it seemed to be heard at the door, and next inside the door. He looked round, beheld, and recognized the figure he had been told of. It was standing and signalling to him with its finger, as though inviting him. He, in reply, made a sign with his hand that it should wait a moment, and applied himself fresh to his tablets and pen. Upon this the figure kept rattling its chains over his head as he wrote. Looking round again, he saw it making the same signal as before, and, without delay, took up a light and followed it. It moved with a slow step, as though oppressed by its chains, and, after turning into the courtyard of the house, vanished suddenly and left his company. On being thus left to himself, he marked the spot with some grass and leaves which he plucked. Next day he applied to the magistrates, and urged them to have the spot in question dug up. There were found there some bones attached to and intermingled with fetters. The body to which they had belonged, rotted away by time and the soil, had abandoned them thus naked and corroded to the chains. They were collected and interred at the public expense, and the house was ever afterwards free from the spirit, which had obtained due sepulture. The above story I believe on the strength of those who affirm it. What follows I am myself in a position to affirm to others. I have a freedman who is not without some knowledge of letters. A younger brother of his was sleeping with him in the same bed. The latter dreamed he saw someone sitting on the couch, who approached a pair of scissors to his head, and even cut the hair from the crown of it. When the day dawned, he was found to be cropped round the crown, and his locks were discovered lying about. A very short time afterwards, a fresh occurrence of the same kind confirmed the truth of the former one. A lad of mine was sleeping in company with several others in the page's apartment. There came through the windows, so he tells the story, 2 figures in white tunics, who cut his hair as he lay, and departed the way they came. In his case, too, daylight exhibited him shorn, and his locks scattered about. Nothing remarkable followed, except perhaps this, that I was not brought under accusation, as I should have been if Domitian, in whose reign these events happened, had lived longer. For in his desk was found an information against me, which had been presented by Carus, from which circumstance it may be conjectured, insomuch as it is the custom of accused persons to let their hair grow, that the cutting off of my slave's hair was a sign of the danger which threatened me being averted. I beg, then, that you will apply your great learning to this subject. The matter is one which deserves long and deep consideration on your part, nor am I, for my part, undeserving of having the fruits of your wisdom imparted to me. You may even argue on both sides, as your way is, provided you argue more forcibly on one side than the other, so as not to dismiss me in suspense and anxiety, when the very cause of my consulting you has been to have my doubts put an end to.
And welcome back to 2016. There are 3 stories in the letter. The first is The Phantom of Africa, the second, the early ghost story, and the third, the hair-cutting people in white tunics. Let's work through them one at a time. Africa appeared, to me at least, when I first heard the story, to be a genius locus, that is, a spirit of place. She appears as this in-between sand and sea. That's where that portion of the manuscript gets its inspiration from. It's entirely unclear what Africa wants from giving these prophecies to a mortal, and therefore she looks suspiciously like a fairy in the sense that all she's looking for is emotional reaction, and perhaps for her story to be told for, in this case, thousands of years. Assuming she's not a fairy, she seems to be limited to the northern expanse of Africa, the fertile bit above the Sahara. That is, in Ars Magica, all of the fairies from that part of Africa are engaged in a civil war between sterility and fertility, and the great power of fertility is embodied in the Nile. This spirit would seem to be on the side of the black, simply because the area she comes from is fertile. She could be wanting the young Roman governor to go away and prepare himself before coming back to administer her territories. Because the black, unlike some magical spirits, has a use for humans. That is, as they spread irrigation, they become the black soldiers in the war against the desert. The second story is a traditional ghost story, a very traditional ghost story, complete with clanking chains. The ghost has all of the Ars Magic elements, being geographically limited, and having a purpose which, once fulfilled, allows the creature to rest. What I find particularly interesting is that because the scholar knows that the ghost has this final task, he's able to say to the ghost, "No, wait a minute, I'm just going to finish what I'm writing here. You just pause there. We both know that you need to communicate with me." That's interesting, and I don't think that's something that a fairy would allow. A fairy needs strong emotions, and so the fairy would become terrifying. I do note that the ghost seems to cause sickness and wasting and mental illness in the people who it encounters, and this seems entirely contrary to the ghost's mission of having itself buried. Therefore, I would suggest that these are involuntary, that these are things that happen merely because the ghost is nearby. They are therefore perhaps a form of warping. The third story is one that I would like to consider the first cases of alien abduction. Glowing figures come in through the window and, upon a sleeping person, perform a medical experiment. Now, the medical experiment isn't a particularly great one. They're stealing the person's hair, which is a mystical connection which allows the creatures to overcome the person's magic resistance and perhaps control them from a distance, but it still contains all of the usual characteristics of what we would now call a sleep apnea experience. In the Middle Ages, these were also referred to as being hag-ridden, and some people conjecture that they have a relationship to the modern experience of people who claim to have been taken from their beds by alien figures. Now, I've always thought of alien abductions as a sort of fairy experience, but you might argue instead that these are the very weakest type of spirits who are interacting with humans through dreams, because in dream states humans are more easily interacted with. They aren't protected by their personalities so strongly. The spirits in this story predict the future, but do not seem to do anything to bring that future about. They tell Pliny that he's not going to be charged with a crime, something which he only works out in hindsight because, like so many creatures in folklore, the things they do are best explained after that explanation has no capacity to be of any use whatsoever. In the frame narrative, Pliny is writing to his friend Sura, and his friend Sura, who's more knowledgeable in metaphysics than he is, has a tendency of arguing both sides of any question. Pliny finds this confusing. In Ars Magica, however, this would be one of the paths to enigmatic wisdom. It's the sort of contemplation of contradiction which lies at the heart of some approaches to Zen. So, in the Ars Magica period, we have examples of spirits using humans as soldiers in their wars. We have ghosts using humans to fulfill their final business on Earth, and we have very early versions of the alien abduction story.